I'm joined now by Nationals frontbencher Barnaby Joyce, the former Deputy Prime Minister. Barnaby, the media story is that the yes case people, they're the good ones, and the no case people, like the Liberals, they're the bad ones, or the Nationals as well. What I heard today suggests that the opposite could be more true.
Well, what are they saying? They're saying basically slightly less than half of Australia are bad people, are guilty, are somehow morally repugnant because they dare to say the word no. They dare to say the word no to a change to their constitution, to take it away from being racially even, everybody's equal, to inserting itself a racial clause. And the left at times, and maybe rightly so, they declare the worth and the proper purpose of the United Nations. Well, Article 1 of the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights says that people are born with equal rights and dignity. Now, this, of course, moves away from it. And once you tick the box that you believe different colours of the skin have different rights, well, you've ticked the box. You've just said it is okay in circumstances to differentiate people on the colour of their skin and to apportion to a certain colour a certain right that other people don't have. Now, when one group gets a right, naturally enough, everybody else is diminished because they don't have access to that right. Now, on the philosophical premise number one, I disagree with this voice. But then we see what comes with it. This is not just a feel-good motion. This is talking about the capacity to have influence over the Governor of the Reserve Bank, the Governor-General, Cabinet Ministers who select High Court judges. That's real power. It's more power than any Cabinet Minister has got. And what happens if over time, as it would seem unsurprising, this unelected body, this selected body, becomes partisan to one side of politics? Then when an election comes, no matter who wins, you've got a partisan side of politics attached to the most inner structure of government, and you can't elect them out. Not even Indigenous people can elect them out. And what do we do in a place like here? As I said, we've got Dungutty, I've got Goomeri, I've got Banjalung up north, I've got Annawan up at Armidale. Which one are you going to select? I can assure you, as sure as apples fall out of trees, that when one is selected and one's not, they'll end up, as they always do, rightly so, in our office, in a political office, complaining. And we'll say, well, I can't do anything about it. So not only have you divided us up on race, you'll actually have divided up in Indigenous communities. But we've had Aboriginal bodies before, ATSIC, the Aboriginal Congress, the Aboriginal Consultative Committee. We've had so many bodies, and as they've been superseded or been out of date, or been engaged in a form of nepotism, which has brought a real sort of focus on their operation, we've managed to legislate them out. But when this is in the Constitution, you're stuck with it. And the idea, the sneaky idea that after you voted, then they'll bring in the legislation for the voice. You can't get your vote back. It's gone. And when they say, oh, the Parliament will decide, well, the Parliament's run by the Labor Party in the House of Representatives and the Labor Party, the Greens and the Teals in the Senate. So it won't be the Liberal Party and the Labor Party and the National Party and the Greens holding hands coming to a consensus point. That's not going to happen, listeners. It's going to be the Labor Party, and they won't have gone far enough, and they'll have to do amendments to look after the Greens and the Teals, which will actually take it to a further point of ridiculousness. In fact, it'll become a bad decision, will become atrocious. Now, I'll give you a warrant from the Labor Party. Even the Labor Party Attorney General tried to put in a mitigating clause, and it was knocked out.
I've got to say, the explanatory memoranda that comes with this legislation says that the government shouldn't be bound by anything the voice says and shouldn't even need to wait for what the voice says. I suspect, and other experts have said, once you get it to the High Court, that could change. Okay. So I have grave doubts in that assurance.
Let me give you an example, Andrew, and your listeners, how this happens. See, what they will say is in the process of consultation that A, you didn't consult on the appropriate issue, you didn't pay enough attention to the appropriate issue, you brought into play irrelevant issues, or you didn't give the appropriate amount of time or process. And by reason of that, you haven't consulted, which is in the Constitution, therefore the decision's out. High courts overrule the executive. If you want a classic example of that, when the High Court overruled the actions of former Agriculture Minister in the Labor Party, Joe Ludwig. And they said you didn't consult properly, you didn't get the right information, you didn't talk to the right people, and even though he'd made a decision, the Commonwealth ended up paying out $600 million, and the decision was called null and void. Now,
the same thing, Barnaby.
But that's one.
The same thing, Barnaby, happens to the immigration ministers in the past quite often too. Didn't consult, didn't consider properly revisit. Ken Wyatt. Yeah, well, exactly. Ken Wyatt was the Indigenous Australians Minister in the Morrison coalition government, has now resigned from the Liberal Party in protest at the Liberal position, saying no to the Voice. His claimed Aboriginal people are reaching out to be heard, but the Liberals have rejected their invitation. Even though the Liberals, in fact, made this man the first Indigenous Minister for Indigenous Affairs, it seems to me, they accepted the invitation with him, very much so. What do you make? Are you surprised, disappointed Ken Wyatt has quit, or totally predictable?
Yeah, well, it's his choice. He's a free person. But look, the first Aboriginal State Member of Parliament, Indigenous State Member of Parliament, Eric Durrell, the Nationals actually brought him into Parliament. The first federal senator, Aboriginal federal senator, was Neville Bonner, the Liberal Party. The first Indigenous member of Cabinet, Ken Wyatt himself, Liberal Party. The first Indigenous Minister for Indigenous Affairs. Mind you, that's a portfolio the Nationals gave up because it used to be with Nigel Scullion. Because we believe this was the right thing, Ken Wyatt again. The 1967 referendum to have Aboriginal people counted in the census on electoral matters as a proper appropriation mandate for people in electoral matters, that was the Liberal Party and the then Country Party. We brought them in. We're not going to take homework. We've always tried to do the right thing. This is falling off its perch because it's massive overreach. And even Ken Wyatt, the cabinet decision which he put a media release out on, talked about only local and regional voices. He didn't talk about a national voice. He didn't talk about putting it in the Constitution.
Yeah, but it's a bandwagon,
so he should have a look at his own homework.
True, but there's a bandwagon and everyone wants to jump on it, including Ken Wyatt. That's the issue here. There's a moral bandwagon and people are scared to be left behind. Just quickly, Barnaby Joyce, when you were Deputy Prime Minister, you backed the Inland Rail project, 700 kilometres of track through Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland. The Albanese government now says a review
still do.
Says the start date is now blown out by another decade. Costs have almost doubled to $31.5 billion. How did that go so wrong?
This is piffle as well. This is like, you ever seen Austin Powers with Dr. Evil, can't say the second word, and Mini-Me? When they start coming up with these numbers, like $37 billion. I mean, prove it. And the reason there's a blowout is by reason of the inertia of environmental studies, Indigenous studies, this study, that study, which of course delays it. And as it delays, as the price of steel goes up, you start getting an increase in costs. Listen to this, Andrew. There is one section of that track, 110 kilometres, it's just outside the New South Wales border in Queensland. 13,000 pages of review for that 110 kilometre piece of track. The Warren report into the investigation of the death of John F. Kennedy was 800 pages. Now, we had 2 reviews. That wasn't good enough, so we had another 2 reviews. That wasn't good enough, so we had 2 reviews to review the 2 reviews. And that's made 6. That wasn't good enough. We had an independent review to review the 2 reviews that reviewed the 2 reviews that reviewed the 2 reviews. That wasn't good enough. And when I appeared back as the minister, guess what they wanted? A review. And guess what they're going to do today? They're going to have another review. I mean, the longer you wait, the more it gets. That 110 kilometre piece of track, I added up the years of experience of all the scientists, 71 of them, 1,000 years. 1,000 years of experience. And asking me the question about
Barnaby,
why the cost blows out.
We need to actually do something about red tape. You just asked Gina Reinhardt what the hoops you've got to jump through to start a mine around this country now. Thank you so much for your time, Barnaby Joyce. after the break.
5,000 applications for New Hope mine. Ridiculous.
Okay, good on you. Thanks, Barnaby.